seniors faces the threat of hunger, and millions more live in isolation. Drop off a hot meal and say a quick hello. Volunteer for Meals on Wheels by donating your lunch break at americaletsdolunch.org. This message brought to you by Meals on Wheels America and the Ad Council.
And welcome back right here to Herbally Yours. I'm the Natural Nurse, naturalnurse.com, and we're talking today with pediatrician Dr. Lawrence Palevsky. You can find him at drpalevsky.com. And remember, if this show is something that interests you, you can always get to our archives by visiting Herbally Yours at WHPC. And you can find archives of many of our shows as well as other shows here at the station. Now, Dr. Palevsky, I'd like to actually go into a vaccination discussion. You know, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Was going to actually have a vaccine safety commission looking into a lot of the things that you're talking about. It seems like right now vaccines are like holy. You're not really allowed to speak against them. And every child, before they get out of the hospital, is being shot up with almost 15 before they are even out of the right when they're born. And I've really been against that for, as I said, many, many years, looking at the science.
Well, again, you're correct. I mean, there's great difficulty in having a human conversation about it. My experience in this subject is that you have a lot of people who hear the science but never read the science, or hear the information but never read the information for themselves. And so what ends up happening is they speak about a belief rather than the actual science. I think I was trained in the United States medical schools, and there was never any question in my education as to whether or not vaccines were an issue, in any adverse way. And it wasn't until I started to self-think, that's a term that I've been using a lot, and not just copy what's been told to me or copy the title of an article that appears in the journal or in the newspaper. And I've been actually going into further questioning of the ingredients and the science. And, if you have somebody who's willing to think, who's willing to have a conversation, who's willing to look at the section of life called I don't know what I don't know, then you might actually realize that there's a huge amount of information that is sitting there waiting to be discovered. Children are very good at discovery. They're very good at investigation. They're very good at inquiry, curiosity. We as adults have lost a lot of it because we become set and convicted about things that we're told that are true. And there's a tremendous amount of research and science that mainstream media won't publicize because the pharmaceutical and vaccine industries pay most of their salaries. But the information is there, and there's a great concern as to whether there's a link between the unbelievable degree of chronic illnesses that we're seeing in children and the incorporation of injected materials into their cells, into their brains, into their livers, into their immune systems. And, the science does show that there is a link, but you're not going to hear that. And those who strongly hold on to the beliefs about vaccines are not usually the ones who can be reached. It's only the people who can peer out through the door and say, I wonder, could there be some validity to this? Let me do some investigation on my own.
Well, you have a wonderful article that anyone can read on your website called Aluminum and Vaccine Ingredients, What Do We Know? What Don't We Know? Which shows so many of the scientific studies and very damning evidence in terms of possibility of devastating effects with things like ADHD and autism and all kinds of other reactions and aluminum toxicity in infants and children.
Well, remember something, Ellen. I mean, most people want to believe that the powers that be are protecting us. that they are looking after us, that they wouldn't allow something damaging to be injected into our children. And so if you can get past that and start to question, you look at just aluminum itself and say, well, what form of aluminum is in the vaccines? Is there a study that actually follows the injection of aluminum into the body to see where it goes once it's injected into the body? No, there isn't. Is there a study that looks to see what aluminum does once it's injected into the body? No, there isn't. Is there a study by mainstream science to identify whether that aluminum stays in the body? No, there isn't, even though the medical literature shows that some of the aluminum from vaccinations can stay inside the cells for years. And, there are different cell structures. We have the cell membrane and we have the cell nucleus, but then we have cell mitochondria, which are the fuel pumps for the cells, and you have the lysosomes, which are the baggage, the garbage disposals of the cell. And you have things called the Golgi apparatus and the endoplasmic reticulum. And some of the scientific studies are showing that this specific aluminum, when injected, destroys or impairs mitochondria and lysosomes. So you reduce the ability to make fuel for your cells, and you reduce the ability for your cells to get rid of the garbage that's produced in the cells. That's the basis of chronic disease, just about across the board. And no one wants to potentially link the injection of this kind of aluminum to the onset of these diseases, even though the scientific literature says, well, yeah, it does. But what you hear instead is pediatricians saying to parents the following: oh, come on, there's so much aluminum that kids are exposed to in their lifetimes compared to what the measly amount that's injected into their body. Well, that's an unfortunate statement, and one that really speaks of a tremendous amount of ignorance, because there's no science to substantiate whether there is a difference between what a child is exposed to in a lifetime versus a one big bolus of aluminum that gets injected into the body. Plus the fact, Ellen, the aluminum that's in the vaccines is different than the aluminum that's inhaled or ingested from the environment. It has different properties. And so if you're going to make a statement that the injection is no worse than the amount that you're exposed to in a lifetime, you got to back it up with science. But there is no science to back that up. And parents are left with this statement from a physician who's supposed to be in a position of authority and knowledge that this somehow is true. And it's not. It's not, because the medical system has not done the appropriate science to really look at how dangerous aluminum is. The science is out there, but not within the control, not within the expression through the avenues that we need in order to really have the discussion and find out what we're really doing to these kids.
And I'd like to remind you, you're listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, and my guest today is Dr. Lawrence Palevsky, medical doctor, pediatrician. Well, that is very, let's say, illuminating, certainly. And, of course, a lot of this research I was able to actually view 40 years ago when I decided not to vaccinate my own children. And I have to say that when they do follow-up studies, it seems that the unvaccinated children have less of these problems, such as developmental learning disability and ongoing ear infections and ear tubes, and a lot of incidences of skin rash and food allergies. I mean, even some of the recent outbreaks at supposed diseases that are controlled by vaccination occurred in the vaccinated population.
Right. And what's even more unfortunate is that the unvaccinated are blamed for these outbreaks when there's plenty of literature to show that vaccinated children shed the materials that they're vaccinated with. And so, again, somehow, because vaccines are so sacred and they couldn't possibly do anything to harm you or worsen a scenario in the environment, it must be the unvaccinated, because once you're vaccinated, you're golden. There's nothing possibly can go wrong with you. You couldn't spread any more disease, which is not true. There's no science to back that up at all. the vaccinated children can cause an epidemic. That's true. That is true. Unfortunately, because of the myths that are passed off as truths, that unvaccinated children are the only vectors of germs once the vaccines are given in enough of a percentage of the population. Where do you go from there? Because it's not true. Unvaccinated children don't carry specific germs that vaccinated kids all of a sudden don't carry because they've been vaccinated. A vaccination doesn't make you no longer carry a germ. In fact, it makes you carry more of it because you're now shedding it. So, again, there's so many myths that are unfortunate in this discussion. And, it would take a lot of time, which I'm trying to do and many of my colleagues are trying to do, to help families tease out so many of the untruths, mistruths, myths that are created. Because somehow parents all of a sudden walk around thinking, well, if my child's vaccinated, he doesn't carry the germ anymore. That's never been proven, and actually it can't be true because most germs come from the air, not from another person.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Palevsky. There's so much to talk about. We'll have to have you on again. Listeners, you can contact Dr. Palevsky at DrPalevsky. Thank you for an illuminating discussion. And thank you so much, listeners, for tuning into Herbally Yours, produced at the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. For further information, email whpc.ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamai, the Natural Nurse at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.